Welcome to the Spirit of Mayflower podcast with me, Rachel Carter, and I'd like to introduce my special guest for today. It's Liz Johnson, and she works for Arts Council England here in the Midlands, and she's the Director of Museums and Collections Development. Welcome to the podcast, Liz.
Hi Rachel, it's lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
You're most welcome. So your role sounds like there's quite a lot to it. Could you give us a flavour of what you do for Arts Council?
I'd be delighted. I've only been doing it for just under a year, and I've done it all from my spare bedroom in Leicester, so I'm still learning. But we do two things at the Arts Council. We have directors of a place, so I'm one of the directors based in the Midlands, but we also have a national leadership role around one of our art forms or disciplines that we look after. And we look after a number of different art forms like theatre or dance. But my specialism is museums, and so we support, as the National Development Agency for museums, all of the accredited museum sector in England, of which there are over 1,300 across the country.
That's a lot of museums to look after. And I think before we go on with the conversation, I'd just like to say thank you. I found out last week that my next project has been awarded Arts Council funding to create a third in the series of Pilgrim Woman, this time for the town of Boston. So thank you so much for the support.
Well, it's our pleasure, and actually it's on behalf of lottery players all over the country. So we should say thank you to anyone who's bought a lottery ticket that's listening to this podcast, because that means you're part of this commission too, which is brilliant.
Oh, yes, thank you very much. If you've brought a ticket, thank you. So this project that's going to take place over this next year is quite exciting because as many of my listeners will have known, that I've already created 2 sculptures, and there's been such a lot that went into the creating of those, traveling over the Atlantic, looking at the museums over in Harvard on the university campus, and going to Provincetown and looking at museums here in the Midlands, and feeding all of that in to a sculpture. And this one is no different. We're going to be looking at a very different part of the Mayflower story and trying to unpick some more of the women's narratives, looking at the separatists that were jailed in Boston jail, bringing in the community with another weaving activity, and putting all that together into a new sculpture that's going to be showcased in a new exhibition at the collection in November. So there's just such a lot happening.
That sounds like just such a wonderful experience as well, and very moving, Rachel. And I think particularly in the week of International Women's Day, as we're recording this at the end of that week, it's really interesting, isn't it, to think and to delve more deeply into women's stories and women's experiences, and perhaps look at them through a new lens. You can even call them her stories instead of his stories.
Yes, her stories. And I've attended quite a few conferences this week during International Women's Week, and to find out, and some of them was about her stories locally and some was internationally, and a really great one with the Royal Society of Sculptors put on a fantastic conference about women in art. And I found some amazing artists that I wasn't aware of, but then listening to all the presenters, there's a lot of things that just hasn't changed, and people's how they perceive an artist. And I think I put out a little tweet that got quite a lot of interest, and said, I refer to myself as a bronze sculptor, and then that often gets changed to female artist or textile artist or local artist, and it's like they can't just give me that tag of bronze sculptor. They have to embellish it with something else, because either they don't quite get it, or they feel that that's a male title. And it's very interesting how we perceive things, and so I'm hoping to sort of use that as a springboard to look at the way that we've perceived the women in the Mayflower story too.
I do think that's absolutely fascinating, and the fact that often in the past and even now we try to understand women's stories by their connections with other people, or by their connections or in relation to perhaps male experience or male roles, rather than to try and understand them through their own experience and through their own expression of their experience. I was involved in an arts project at Hardwick Hall in Derbyshire, which is the home of Bess of Hardwick. You may
Oh
have heard.
yes, yes, I know of Bess.
Yeah, very famous woman, but actually all of these stories about her were written by men. So there was some new research commissioned looking at her own writing and the language she uses to describe herself, and then working with contemporary women and a photographer to try and understand her own experiences through the language of other women rather than through the language of men and male historians over time. And it sounds to me like you're doing something, you know, very similar and inspiring in that way of kind of and that's where I think these kind of commissions of contemporary work with historical narratives and with museums and collections are so powerful, because they enable us to kind of have a new lens
Yeah,
on an old story. And that, you know, it sounds great.
thank you. And I think you know, this whole series of my Spirit of Mayflower project, you know, has been stretched now over 4 years. And one of the things that really piqued my interest at the very beginning was finding my own ancestors living in those areas that we called Pilgrim Roots District, and wanted to know more about them. And getting back 400 years, you know, has been hard work. And but there's things that have popped out in my own history that have intrigued me, and I've delved in more, and that got my interest going about the Pilgrims and the Mayflower story. And one of my other loves is actually history. So it's fantastic to be able to pool all of these different interests, ancestry and history and art, into a project. And I'm really looking forward to working with the collection over at Lincoln, because one of the elements that we'll be going into more detail about in a future episode is the lucet. And that's a weaving device that's it looks a little like a two-pronged fork, and it was introduced to the UK by the Vikings when, and particularly when we were living under Danelaw. And I find that fascinating because I've recently done my DNA, and I found out that I'm 10% Viking. So it was quite exciting.
Oh, that's amazing. And learning new skills, but they're old skills, is a fascinating one, isn't it, as well? And the kind of it gives you a feeling for the sort of the biology of people as well, doesn't it? In the sense of the ways in which they were using their hands, or the impact, you know, you might develop a new rough bit. I've taken up embroidery during lockdown, for example, and it's had a, you know, a different impact on my fingers.
Yeah.
So you develop different, you know, so I think doing things, that kind of living experience of what other people have done in the past, is a really interesting way to think about those people that we can't meet, and but we're so intrigued about.
Yes, definitely. And there's just so many elements of this story to unpick. And I think before we go any further, we're just going to have a little creative break. So I'm going to play you the first in our poetry season. So they are poems written by a group of ladies who refer to themselves as the Lippy Women of Doncaster. And here's Claire with her poem.
Ask the stinking sweet ship how she avoided sinking. Ask the harpies, gorgons, Charybdis. Ask the sea, the sea, the sea. Ask the piss-pot tossers, the blood moppers, the cradle rockers, the bruise soothers, the breastfeeders, they always on the movers. Ask the sea, the sea, the sea. Ask Mary, mum to be Allerton. Ask the shrouders of Mary's baby. Ask Constance Hopkins of midwifing her mum. Ask how Dorothy Bradford of Austerfield fell overboard in Cape Cod Harbour. Ask how Eleanor Billington's humanity was undermined by her profanity. Ask the bitch English spaniel. Ask the bitch slobbery mastiff. Ask the breeding vermin. Ask the sea, the sea, the sea. Ask Amelia Earhart, Marilyn Monroe, Julia Child, Catherine Hepburn, Grandma Moses, or Scooby-Doo daughter, Fiat Brewster. Ask Julia Roberts, Ellen DeGeneres, Jodie Foster, Elizabeth Needham Ballard, or other greats. Ask not what they could do for their country. They did not need to ask. Blessed were the Pilgrim Mothers and all who sailed on the Mayflower.
Well, what a fantastic poem. And this is something new for this season, building on what I had for season 1, which was working with Highcliffe Music. And it was really nice to pepper the podcast with pieces of the letters, which were imagined letters from the perspective of Mary Brewster, and then song. So this season we're going to have poems from Lippy Women and the music of Mick Jenkinson. So it's really nice to bring in some other creatives along with this journey. So let's carry on with our sort of look at the project of what's to come. So one of the things that I really want to push is the technology of creating sculpture, and the creating of the Pilgrim Woman took me on quite a journey, and looking into photogrammetry and digital mapping, combining that with the lost wax technique, which is, you know, really ancient technique. And it'd be interesting to hear if there's any of the museums that you look after that are also looking into that sort of digital world to bring collections to life for visitors.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I was fascinated to see some of those techniques that you've just been talking about, and those fusions of old and new are so powerful, aren't they?
Mm.
Digital has been really important in the last year, I think, for all of us. I mean, I've certainly consumed more digitally than I ever expected to. But yes, you're right. And there are new and innovative ways to get involved in collections. I don't know if you saw, there's been some sort of immersive Van Gogh experiences that have popped up over the last year, for example, where people have sort of, you know, you can kind of effectively walk into a Van Gogh painting that's projected on the walls, the floors, the ceilings. I think that's a really fascinating example. Lots of people doing great podcasts as well, like you. So it doesn't have to be right at the top end of technology for technology to be helpful in sharing and understanding the past.
Yeah, and what really gets, you know, piques my interest is finding textures. And, you know, I just love to delve into lots of different hand processes, and I've used so many over the years, but there's still so many yet for me to delve into. And I think this is why sometimes people tend to use the term textile artist, because that feels more accessible to them. And a lot of the techniques I use do involve textiles in some way. And the lucite is one of those examples. But what I'd like to try and do is experiment with different threads and cords and create pieces on the lucite, and then see if we can cast them in bronze. And so,
oh wow,
it's going to be quite exciting to see which cords work better, because so far with my journey of experimentation with the foundry, I found that a waxed linen works the best, because linen, being a natural material, burns out well in the casting process, but the fact that it's impregnated with wax just helps it be a bit more combustible.
But back to your point, Rachel, though, I really don't think that if a male bronze sculptor presented themselves and happened to use textiles in their work, that they would be referred to as a textile artist.
I don't think you're right.
That's to one side. I mean, that does sound absolutely fascinating, and sounds like it could have some really gorgeous effects. Another example I can think of which is relevant to that is the use of 3D scanning and 3D printing in museums. So museums obviously have a lot of things in that we can't let everybody touch. And that's, that's for good reason, because there wouldn't be an object left after hundreds of thousands of people had touched it over its lifetime. So museums have started to experiment with 3D scanning an object and then 3D printing either scale models or sort of smaller versions. And that's brilliant, because it means you can get a really exact version of the item. And if it's, say, a wood carved something, you can really see, where the carving took place, and again, you can get that sense of the action of the artisan, the craft, the maker behind it. But you can actually pick up the 3D printed version and take a really good look at it.
Yeah, that's so true. And I've been told off so many times in countless museums and art galleries, because as a sculptor, my sense of touch is my primary sense, and I'm just, sometimes I get so engrossed in a piece, I just want to touch it, and I forget myself, and I'm reaching out, and then I hear a guard shout, "No!" And I do it all the time. So that's something that I really want to address when I put together all the pieces that are going to go on show at the collection, that there will be items there that you can touch and you can feel. And a couple of years ago, I went to the Tate to see their exhibition of Annie Alba's work. And I really loved the way that they'd set that exhibition out. You've got these fantastic pieces that she created, but then you'd also got the historical context of some of the cultures that she looked at for inspiration, and some of the places that she'd been to, and they were showing the historic items alongside her pieces of work. And by the time you got to the end, you just so wanted to touch something, they'd rewarded you with a touching room, and you could touch all the textiles and the types of fibers that she'd used, and you could see her loom and watch a video of her on the loom, and then it really did you sort of reward all of those senses. So that's something I really want to sort of make use of, and there will be a piece of scanned macrame that has been 3D printed and cast in bronze that will be out there for you to touch. So it's interesting to say about museums, so I'm hoping to do the same with my collection.
Oh, that sounds great. And of course, when people touch that piece that you create, it'll change it, won't it, as well? It'll add patina to it, because the bronze will change, won't it?
It will.
I love that on statues, when you can see where people have touched the public art. And the one that always springs to mind is the one at St Pancras in this train station. They've got that there's a massive pair of people kissing, isn't it? I don't know who the artist is. And then there's this lovely kind of vignettes of lots of different things that happen in train stations all the way around the bottom of it, and you can see where people touch the dog's nose, or they touch the woman's bottom, and you get a sense. But what's really powerful about that is it to some extent it shows you what the connection is between the person who's experiencing the art or the thing that's been made, and it's sort of a tangible way of seeing what it is that moves people, or what they want to feel. And I think you're right. It would be great if there was more opportunities for sort of multi-sensory experiences. I mean, for example, I don't know what it smells like when you make a bronze sculpture. When you do the lost wax technique, is it very smelly process?
No, I actually don't know, because I'm not allowed to be there at that point, because they're handling molten metal, and only a small crew covered in these, it looked like spacesuits. But from my own experience of other types of metal work, I would imagine it wouldn't smell too different to when you're welding, that weld smell that you get. And I used to love welding. It was just so you just could get in there bending the metal and rolling it in the rolling machine and then welding it all together. It was amazing part of my sort of development. So I would imagine it smells a little like that. But
amazing.
So yeah, there's just I think you've really hit something there about, you know, that trace and the touch of the human hand left behind on sculptures, and something I'm hoping that, you know, a long time in the future, when people are engaging with these three pilgrim women, that there will be pieces that have been touched and fondled, and it will slowly sort of turn to a goldy colour, because as you touch and rub the bronze, you're removing the patina, that coloured surface. But because we have so many oils in our fingertips, you're replacing a protective layer. So because usually a bronze sculpture is it's covered with a patina, the coloured layer, and then protected with a beeswax layer to give that patina longevity. So as you're rubbing that off, you're removing the coloured layer and the beeswax, but then you're replacing it with your own oils from your fingers. So that's why we have these gold coloured patches on public bronzes. And I used to really love visiting Nottingham Castle and seeing Robin Hood outside, because he always had a gold shiny head where people had rubbed the top of his head, but they've recently had him repatinaed, so his gold patch is gone.
Oh, it's such a shame in a way, isn't it? Because it's part of the story.
Yeah, which bit do people want to touch the most? And I think we're going to find that when the Downham Gallery in Doncaster opens, and people can see the big sort of 6-foot pilgrim woman, and with all of her intricate weaves. So it'd be interesting to see what people touch and what they're drawn to. The Pilgrim Woman in Gainsborough is already out by the waterside, and I've received some beautiful images of people that have gone past and looked at it and took photographs and sent them to me. And there was one where she was in the frost, and all of her kirtle at the back, it had covered in these tiny little particles of frost and ice, and it was a beautiful picture that I think you just had to be there at that very moment. So it's amazing as an artist to get feedback like that from people who've seen and interacted with my sculptures.
Yes, brilliant, lovely.
So, well, that brings us to the end of this episode, and I think we could talk all day, couldn't we, Liz, about collections and museums and different things, but alas, we've run out of time. And I just want to thank you for agreeing to be part of the podcast, and also for funding this project, and for the people who have brought lottery tickets, who have helped create these pots of money that are then shared out across the country to support amazing projects. So thank you, Liz.
Oh, it's been a great pleasure. You can't see me, but I've got a lovely big grin on my face. I've thoroughly enjoyed chatting with you, and I wish you all the very best with what comes next.
Thank you very much, and I'll make sure I send you an invite to the collection to see the pieces.
Oh yes,
they're
please.
all finished. That's lovely. Thank you very much, Liz. Spirit of Mayflower is part of a series celebrating my Spirit of Mayflower project. You can get involved in lots of ways. You can take a look at some of the movies and pictures I took on my journey by heading to the Rachel Carter Sculpture Facebook page. You can also head to my website at www.rachelcarter.co.uk, and there you'll be able to view some of the sculptures I make, treat yourself to a limited edition Pilgrim Woman sculpture, or take a look at some of the online tutorials.
We are riding on the tide with a cargo full of hopes and